Olas Media. Olas Media presents Cannabis Enlightened. Now here's your host, Dr. Leroy Brady.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Cannabis Enlightened. I am your host, Dr. Leroy, and today we have a very, very informative guest with us today. Someone I met at a conference in November of 21. And I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, she really stood out on the panel that she was on. And I said to myself, I've got to have this lady on my program because not only is she very intelligent, but her organization is one that I believe people that want to know about cannabis and what cannabis is all about, they need to know the support that cannabis has throughout the state and throughout the country. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Lindsay to introduce herself and give us a little bit of a background, Lindsay, of where you came from, how you were educated, and what makes you the star that you are.
Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Lindsay Robinson, and I am the Executive Director of the California Cannabis Industry Association. We are a nonprofit trade association that represents 400 businesses across the state of California. We're one of the largest trade associations and one of the most respected that lobby on behalf of the legal cannabis industry. And we've been around since 2013. So this is year number 9, started before legalization, and we're supportive of Prop 64 and have been working diligently to represent our members' interest in Sacramento to try and reform, the cannabis laws so that they work better for businesses, while certainly keeping in mind the intent of Prop 64 and public safety, but making sure that these businesses have an environment that they can thrive in. So I actually joined the board of directors at CCIA in 2015 and then transitioned into the executive director role in 2017. So I'm just about on my 5th anniversary.
Oh, my goodness. So what does the executive director do from day to day?
Well, pretty much everything. We are a small organization and we have a small staff and a couple lobbyists. We have a state lobbyist whose name is Amy Jenkins. She runs a lobbying firm called Precision, and she has been around since the beginning of CCIA and is by far one of the most influential lobbyists working in the space today and is incredibly knowledgeable. So I work very closely with her and a small little legislative team to execute our strategy. We also have a federal lobbyist who keeps us informed and engaged on all things federal, because it's really important for the largest cannabis market in the country to be represented on Capitol Hill. And that is Safira Galoob of the Liaison Group. And then I have several staff, and we work diligently to keep our members informed and work on education projects. And really a lot of the work that we do is we try to bridge the gap between the legislators and our members so that the legislators feel fully aware of the constraints and the issues that our members are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And our members understand how the legislative process works and how their voice is really crucial to this fight for policy reform. So I do everything from balance the budget to run committees to wrangle my board of 15 directors to manage staff, speaking opportunities, media engagement, meeting with legislators, cleaning the toilets, whatever needs to be done. I do. I'm very hands-on in all aspects of our work.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you're chief cook and bottle washer, but you pretty much summed it up there at the end.
I like to say that sometimes I'm an executive director and sometimes I'm an intern. It just depends on the day.
What day it is.
But yeah, it's a very dynamic job. It's a very dynamic space. So
you said something earlier that I think people should really focus on, in that your organization really focuses on and represents the legal cannabis industry. And
Mhm.
the reason why I'm going to that is because there is a lot of talk about the black market, the illegal market, and so forth. In what ways does your organization support the legal cannabis industry?
Yeah, we often refer to it as the illicit or the unregulated market.
Okay.
And it is, it's hard sometimes to estimate the exact size of the illicit market, but it's between 3 and 4 times the legal market. So when you think about revenue, when you think about tax generation, there's a lot of activity that is happening that is unregulated, which also means that the cannabis itself is not tested and not regulated the way that legal cannabis is. So the kind of safeguards that are put in place with testing and just regulating, the entire supply chain on the legal side, none of that exists on the illicit side. So it's problematic for a number of reasons, but we also have to really understand the legacy of California cannabis. And we've had folks cultivating cannabis here for many generations, without regulation. And so we were unique in that way as a state, because when other states came online, like Colorado, which was the first to legalize for adult use, they didn't have the robust underground system, and they had a fully functioning medical regulatory system in place. And California really didn't have that. We had an enormous underground market and a newly regulated medical market. And honestly, the bills that were passed in the fall of 2015 to regulate medical were really just in anticipation of legalization coming the next year. So we had a patchwork framework prior to that under Prop 215, which was passed in the mid 90s, and then some subsequent bills that tried to help shape that legal market, but it was really an opt-in system, and most cities and counties had no ordinances or anything on the books for medical. So there was a few spots that did. The Bay Area and LA had some regulations in place for medical, but there was no statewide system for medical. So we've had a really hard time transitioning a lot of the folks from the underground market into the legal space. And there's a number of reasons why it's been challenging. For the most part, the regulatory landscape is very complicated. It's expensive. There are a lot of barriers to entry. And you really have to reconcile the local control issue, the local ordinance issues with the state, because there are two different frameworks that you have to operate under to be fully licensed state. So it's a very complicated environment. And what we like to do is we really want to make sure that our members understand how the regulations, also, I should say the regulations are changing all the time and new laws are being introduced every year. We want our members to understand how those laws and regulations affect their businesses, and give feedback to the regulators and the legislators about those pain points. Because unless we stabilize the legal system, that underground market is going to continue to thrive. And that is really not the goal or the intent of Prop 64. So it's really about education on both sides. And we do direct advocacy on bills. We help craft bills and craft language for bills. We lobby for bills. We educate our members on those bills. And there's a lot that goes into passing progressive, kind of sensible policy reform. And so we work on both sides with the members and then also with the legislators.
So specifically, how do you stabilize the legal market? How do you, or legal companies, how do you stabilize that?
So it's kind of a multi-prong approach that we feel is going to be the most effective. Number one, the industry is taxed at multiple points in the supply chain, which leads to a really high markup for the consumer. So if you are purchasing cannabis in the unregulated market, it is oftentimes, 3 to 4 times cheaper than it would be if you're purchasing it in the legal market, because you have to pay for testing, you have to pay for distribution, distribution, there's the cultivation tax, there's excise tax, there's local taxes as well as state tax. So it just compounds through the supply chain. So it is expensive to buy legal cannabis. So part of what we need to do is look at streamlining that process in terms of taxes and lowering the price point so that more consumers want to come to the legal side. The other thing is that because of the juxtaposition with the ordinances on the local, right, that sort of local control, local opt-in, there are many places in the state that have no legal cannabis at all. They don't have any type of ordinance on the books. And so we call those cannabis deserts, if you will, legal cannabis deserts. So the illicit market is still thriving in those places, but legal cannabis is not accessible. And so we need more retail access. We need more opportunities for people either through delivery or storefronts to be able to purchase legal cannabis at a reasonable price. And then we also need to make sure that the compliance and the regulatory process is not so overly burdensome that folks can't enter into the market. And I think all of those things, which hopefully we'll talk a little bit about, are exacerbated for social equity or low-income folks who are trying to navigate that transition into the legal market and then stay legal. Because one of the things is sometimes businesses are able to get funding from friends or family, right? Because we also often don't have access to traditional capital and banks because we're still illegal on the federal level. But folks will raise money within their community or friends, and they'll be able to get off the ground. But then to be able to stabilize and keep that company going is a whole different story. So we really need to make sure that these companies who are navigating the legal space are able to stay legal and hopefully thrive. And what we're seeing now is that they're not. Many of them are not. And it's causing a lot of strain and stress on the entire supply chain.
A lot of people think that there's all this money to be made in the cannabis, in the legal cannabis industry. But something that you just talked about, all the taxes that cannabis is taxed at multiple junctures, which puts a real burden on the cannabis operator. Can you talk a little bit about, those types of taxes, or what happens to a person that comes into the cannabis space?
Absolutely. And it is incredibly hard to not only navigate and stay afloat in this industry. I mean, most of the businesses that we work with are struggling in one way or another. The plant touching side of their business is really challenging. And so what we think is a good solution at this point would be to eliminate or suspend, at least for a period of time, the cultivation tax, which is really the beginning of the tax kind of system. And then that's part of what compounds throughout the supply chain. And so relieving the cultivators initially of that tax, we think would be hugely beneficial. And then also thinking about how we could possibly lower the excise tax so that, again, it balances out that there's still competitive pricing, but that the consumer is not paying such an exorbitant amount of fee for legal cannabis, because we feel that will help the business, but also will bring more consumers in. So it'll help lift up the market overall. And it's complicated. I mean, a lot of the folks that we work with, in order to survive, they have compliance teams. It's not even just one individual. It's a team of people that they pay to navigate this legal system. And that's incredibly difficult and very expensive. Mm-hmm. And so really we know that everything's going through growing pains as we navigate this legal space in the first few years of adult use, but we really need to think about the long-term future and health of the industry. And while high taxes seemed like a good idea, I would imagine to some at the beginning, the businesses are almost getting taxed out of existence. So it's a compounding process. Yeah.
And on the other side, the illicit businesses don't pay any taxes. They pay nothing, absolutely nothing. And the really bad part about that is that the cannabis that they're selling is not tested. I mean, you don't know where it came from. You don't know what's in it. It's just they say it's cannabis, so it's cannabis as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, and it's also, it's not just flower too, right? So they're manufacturing and selling vape pens. And I'm sure you will remember in 2019, the Valley crisis, where there was additives and there was all sorts of serious health concerns that were happening. And those were all traced back to the illicit market, unregulated vapes. Because if you're on the legal side, that product is tested multiple times and is deemed safe, under current guidelines. And so we saw a massive health crisis really from the unregulated industry. And that was across not just California, that was across the US. So you're always going to have people who want to cut corners and who are not interested in joining the legal side of things. I think that's just the nature of business in general, and certainly the nature of cannabis. But I think both local and state governments have a responsibility to make that pathway to the legal side as easy as possible to navigate and to thrive in, because without that, you sort of give people no choice.
Right. I think that the statement you made a few minutes ago deserves to be underlined, because many people go back to that the vape, the vaping pens, and all the bad stuff that happened, and all the bad press, and oh my gosh, things, the world's going to end on that. But you just pointed out that came from the illicit market. That's not from the legal market. Mm-hmm. But yet still, the legal market took the brunt of that problem.
Indeed. And we worked incredibly hard to educate legislators about the findings and the research that was coming out on where, the sources of those contaminated vape cartridges. And I think it was a very challenging lift for the industry, because we want to be regulated. We want to be taxed at a reasonable rate. We want to be regulated in a sensible way. And when we see contaminated vapes that have packaging that looks legitimate, we also saw a lot of counterfeit product, which was really disturbing. So from well-known brands, we saw product that looked just like theirs that was from the illicit market and was contaminated. So that does brand damage too, which is a whole other issue. But it was a heavy lift for us to educate the public and the legislators, because the reaction, the kind of knee-jerk reaction from all of that was they were like, well, we're just going to ban vape cartridges. Yeah. And on from the legal side, that does nothing to take care of the issue, because that's not where the problem was. And so a lot of times we see sort of Band-Aid effects, where I think overreach of government says, we're just going to put this thing on top of it and it's going to go away. And instead of dealing with the root causes. And I think, at least with stabilizing the industry, I think we're pretty aware of how to do that. It's a complicated process to do it. And not all sides agree. I will say there's a lot of stakeholders within the industry, and so a lot of what we do is coalition building and trying to work with as many folks as we can to move that needle forward on the policy reform. But so much of it is education. And as we see legalization, go across the country, and certainly medical, I think we have 40 states now that have some form of medical on the books. There's a normalization that's happening, right? There's, this is a regulated product. It's a safe product. There can be complications, certainly with overuse, and people not being responsible with their cannabis, right? Not allowing their kids to access it in the house or what have you. But a lot of that is individual behavior, and that's not something that we can usually regulate our way out of, right? So, we try as hard as we can to create good models, I think. And that's a lot of what the industry that we work with, they're doing. They give back to their community. They often have like community watch programs around their retail operations. They donate to food banks, they donate to children's programs. And then also, a huge chunk of the tax revenue that is generated is going to youth programs and youth prevention and education and rehabilitation, as well as to environmental groups and to police. So I think it's a really thoughtful and interesting balance between, where that money is coming from, the tax revenue, and where it's going. And that is something that we have to be mindful of when we advocate for tax reform as well, because we don't want to undercut those programs. What we want to do is stabilize the industry so that they can actually give more to those programs in the long run.
Wow, Lindsay, you're a talking, walking, moving commercial for the cannabis industry. Man, you hit all the buttons all at once. One thing that I do want to go back to is, and maybe highlight a little bit, is that when you talked about the vape pens and how people were down on the vape pens, it's my contention that being down on the vape pens eased over into, maybe quickly, into cannabis itself. People were not just down on the vape pens, but down on cannabis, thinking that, well, perhaps we made a wrong decision, 216, and legalizing it. Maybe we should rethink that whole thing. But I like the way you make it clear that, the bad things that came from the vape pens, came from the illegal market, the illicit market. I really appreciate that. That really tells listeners that, you really need to do more research and not just, you hear the first thing and just grab on it and say, okay, we're going to burn down all the cannabis. No, you need to look at it and perhaps get behind organizations like yours, or your organization, to be specific, because you are doing some really good things from the local standpoint, state, and even national, to make sure people understand the legal market and that it's beneficial.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think, it is hard for an average consumer to understand this complex system, and it's hard for businesses too. And, I think we have an obligation to really help educate the public about the safe, what cannabis is and how it can be used safely. And it's not going to be for everyone. We're certainly, not advocating the use of cannabis in any way, but it's already in all of these communities. And it's the obligation, I believe, of local and state government to help regulate it, and also reap the benefits of that tax revenue.
Absolutely.
So, slowly and surely, I think we're coming along to that. But, we certainly, when I first started this work, we had legislators who wouldn't even speak to us. They wouldn't meet with us. They wouldn't speak to us. And now almost all of them will, even if they still don't like cannabis. They at least understand that regulation is better than no regulation.
Well, let me ask you this, Lindsay, on that point. Do you feel like, and if I box you into a corner, please let me know. You can say, Dr. Leroy, I don't want to answer that question.
Okay.
Are people, are lawmakers, people, general public, are they afraid to get into the cannabis space or talk about the cannabis space from a political standpoint, rather than, I actually use some of the product, but I don't want everybody to know because it is still a Schedule I drug?
I think more and more legislators are willing to kind of stand up for the issue, because they understand, I think, that crucial point that regulation is better than no regulation. And making sure we're tracking what's happening in the industry is much more sensible than pretending it's not happening. So we have real legislative champions that have been pretty amazing over the past few years, and really believe in creating a workable system for these businesses to thrive in. I think one of my favorite pieces is talking with more conservative lawmakers about their sort of aha moment with cannabis. And a lot of the stories that I hear is people having a loved one or a family member that somehow cannabis helped them with, a mother or a sister who was going through breast cancer, and cannabis was the only thing that helped. And that really is the roots of most cannabis activism. When you think about it, that the medical movement is really, was born in the Bay Area. And kind of took center stage, I think, because of the health crisis around HIV and AIDS, and the comfort and the ability of that plant to help so many people who were so sick. And I love having those conversations, especially with lawmakers who, you never would think would tell you that story. and they, they kind of sit you down and look you in the eye and say, that changed my perspective on cannabis. And I think we know that it provides comfort to people who are battling a number of different illnesses. But I also think from an adult use perspective, that if people want to go home and have a glass of wine, that's totally acceptable. But if someone wants to go and smoke a joint with friends, that's less acceptable. And to me, I think we know cannabis is much safer than alcohol. So one is very socially acceptable and one is becoming more acceptable, but there's some folks who are very staunchly opposed to cannabis. I think that is lessening over time when they see that legalization prevents crime and, allows access to safe cannabis and generates revenue for, tax revenue for the state and for local economies, and also is a job creator and is an economic stability mechanism that I think is really underrated. And, during COVID, we saw it deemed an essential business. I think that all of that is leading to a more accepting society on cannabis, even if you don't choose to use it. Even if that's not the right path for you or your family, that's fine. I think, but saying that, people shouldn't have it is, I think we're kind of past that point. You know what I mean? And I've actually had Republican lawmakers in Congress, during hearings on banking, just talk about how cannabis should be banned and we should go back and revoke everything from the states and say that it's, anyone that passed a medical or adult use, that we have to, try to go back and reverse that. And it's like, that ship's kind of sailed. Most of these were passed by voter initiatives. And I think it's important to honor the will of the people. And so it is now the government's responsibility to help build a sensible system for that. And we can't just bury our head in the sand.
Well, I would think that they would be willing to go back and let people damage themselves on opioids. But I don't want you don't have to respond to that one.
Yeah, true, though.
Stay with us. We'll be back with more Dr. Leroy after this quick break. You're listening to Cannabis Enlightened on the Olas Media Podcast Network.
American democracy's good, but we can make it better. The National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers includes organizations across the country who are working right now to build a better democracy by opening primaries, implementing safe, secure voting systems, reducing corruption, and increasing transparency. Listen to our weekly podcast, How to Win Friends and Save the Republic, to hear updates from the latest movements in the democracy reform space. Subscribe and learn more about us at nonpartisanreformers.org.
You're listening to Cannabis Enlightened on the Olas Media Podcast Network.
In addition to people talking about how cannabis has helped a relative of theirs that helped them turn the corner, one of the things that I found, because I think you might remember when we first met, I told you that I teach a class called The Business of Cannabis. People use cannabis in a certain way with their pets, with their animals. And that has made them turn the corner totally. I mean, that it helps people as far as they're concerned is fine. But for a lot of people, their pet is like a relative. And if it helps my pet, then it's good stuff. It needs to be sold. So I think it's really funny the way it happens. One individual in my class has some exotic pets that he used. He tried everything else with the veterinarian, and he used a little bit of cannabis, and the pet, immediately got better. So the more people know, I think the more they start to feel like, well, maybe this isn't so bad,
Yeah. Well, knowledge is power, right? Being able to understand and choose it for yourself or not choose it, but to say that other people can't choose it, that's not right.
Yeah. And, the other thing you mentioned that it's a big deal in this space. And I've had people on from the union, the UFCW,
Mhm.
And they talk about that it is a job builder. It builds
Mhm.
jobs,
Yep.
and within that union space, the jobs that they build, that the cannabis space build, has benefits like any other job that you would go on, the health benefits, the dental, the eye, the whole bit. So
Mhm.
people really have to look at this industry a whole lot different.
Yeah,
So,
and hopefully they will. I mean, again, it's a lot of it is just hearing people speak about it and understanding A, the complexities of it, but B, the real positives of it. I mean, the industry is struggling, but we still see, massive tax generation, and we still see jobs being created, and we still see, labor unions working with businesses across the state. And overall, it is a positive trend. There's kinks along the way, and that's
yeah.
part of what we're trying to focus on is how do we make this easier for these businesses to stay alive. And we're not talking about cutting corners. We're talking about manageable regulation, because it is one of the most regulated industries I've ever seen.
Can you talk about, from a political standpoint, how the taxation prevents social equity from taking hold in many of our communities?
I think that taxation is just one component of the challenges that many social equity applicants and licensees face. It is incredibly expensive to even enter into this industry. And so when I spoke earlier about, that kind of first raise, right, that fundraising that you might be able to do from family and friends or colleagues, in order to build that business, without the traditional opportunities from banks. And we know that lending from banks can actually be, pretty inherently racist as well.
Yeah.
Being and not even having that as an option. The financing is very difficult. Overcoming any type of incarceration, right? So licensees sometimes are favored if they've had a loved one, or they themselves have been incarcerated, kind of under that banner of social equity. But that doesn't mean that navigating that space is going to be any easier. So it's the taxes, it's just the general running of a business that's hard for everyone. All of that seems to be exacerbated for social equity applicants. And so there are certain communities around the state that have social equity programs that are really trying to do the best they can to lower those barriers to entry, and make sure that those businesses have licensing priority, make sure that those businesses have training and have opportunities for technical assistance or legal assistance, and assistance potentially in negotiating contracts. Because a lot of the times too, we're seeing really across the board is businesses that are working with other businesses that are better financed.
Mm.
So, coming together in a contract, and then, perhaps the contract is more favorable to the well-financed business than it is to the social equity applicant, or to the smaller business or legacy business. And so monitoring that system is something that actually one of our board members works really closely on. And that is, something that she helps, is make sure that those contracts are really equitable and fair, because that's a really difficult space to navigate for anyone on a good day. And so I think being able to provide additional resources for smaller businesses and social equity to help navigate that minefield really, is what we're seeing kind of crop up with local programs around the state. And they
No,
are receiving. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no. It just sounded to me like you're talking about a David and Goliath fight here in the cannabis space. The smaller social equity, maybe entity, the David, going against the big companies that
Mhm.
are coming in and trying to just take up everything, take up all the space, buy up the licenses or the permits or what have you. So they can do that because they have a lot of money, and maybe they can sit on a piece of property and wait for a year before it's permitted in that particular city or county, and the
Mhm.
smaller company can't. The smaller, not company, but the smaller entity cannot do that. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I've heard directly from folks who have sat on properties while they were waiting for their license to move through local for 18 months.
Mm,
And in order to get that local permit, they had to have a property. But
mhm.
then they have to sit on that property. It's empty.
Yeah.
And, and that is I don't know who can afford to pay for that, right? A very well-financed company, probably, but an individual or a group of folks, like that is incredibly hard to navigate. And so again, right, it's getting that money together for that first push in order to open the business and navigate the licensing process, but then being able to stay open. And so that's the real tricky piece. And part of it is that some of this licensing takes a really long time on both the local and state level. And we work closely with the Department of Cannabis Control, and we provide feedback to them about how much harder it is waiting for those licenses to be processed than it needs to be. It's an excruciating process. Sometimes that folks will have a business will have everything submitted, and they will wait 4 months to even hear back. So that's another component of the challenge to navigating this space.
Now, you've covered some of this already in the beginning, but I just want to, open up, the gates so that you have an opportunity to discuss any future political issues that you're dealing with in the cannabis space that the public needs to know about.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, currently we are tracking 37 different bills in the legislature right now that will touch cannabis.
Wow.
It's a lot to cover. In the past, actually, I believe it was 2018, we had 55, and 2019, I think we had close to that, which is just a mind-blowing number of bills that could potentially be passed and then affect the way that our members and legal cannabis operators do business. And that doesn't even touch on the regulations. So there's a lot of change, which also makes it really challenging for businesses to navigate. But we are working on sensible tax reform. There's a coalition of organizations and stakeholders that are meeting to try and understand the best pathway forward, because we need to make sure that we are not, again, hindering the recipients of that tax money. So the youth organizations and the environmental groups and the police that receive funding from tax revenue generated from legal cannabis, we want to make sure that those businesses are funded and that they're still able to reap the benefits of legal cannabis. So we're trying to think about creative ways that we can lower taxes to stabilize the industry and also, keep those programs funded. So we're working with a number of different legislators on these issues. There are 5 different tax bills currently, and we're anticipating that either a bill will move forward, 1 or 2 bills will move forward, or some of that language will be taken and will be brought into a trailer bill for the May revise of the governor's budget, so that we can think about comprehensive reform. And retail access is another one. So those are the 2 real points that I believe will stabilize the industry to a great degree, is sensible tax reform and expanding retail access. So that means that we are working, hopefully that more jurisdictions open up for either retail or delivery in order to increase the number of consumers, which again will raise that pot of tax revenue.
And is your organization basically a business membership, or can individuals get involved?
We're mostly business, B2B, but certainly we have some individuals. Sometimes we work with folks who have, who are attorneys or marketing gurus, who are really interested in working in this space, and that's a great way for them to plug in. We don't have a ton of just, individuals who are interested in cannabis but don't have any business affiliation as members, but we do have a few. For the most part, we operate like a traditional trade association, so it's really geared towards business. But we also help with education campaigns that benefit the public. We've worked with the DCC, the Department of Cannabis Control, in the past on some of their educational campaigns, and we've got a few different projects moving forward that are going to be based a hybrid between business education and kind of consumer education, because that is a big hurdle as well. And I think an area that we need improvement on is making sure folks understand, what legal cannabis is, and really understand how to spot dispensaries or retail operations or delivery operations or products that aren't compliant. because there's some very good counterfeits out there, and it is hard to navigate that space. And we want people to be responsible with their cannabis, not only how they purchase it, but how they store it, and keeping it out of the hands of children. All of that is really important to be a conscious consumer, if you will.
So is there an individual membership that folks can buy or belong to or get through your organization?
So we do it. We do. We have a couple different, the social equity one might be a good fit for some people, especially if they're looking to come into the industry. And then our lowest level tier is the associate level. And like I said, most of the folks that join our businesses, but we also accept individuals. So that would probably be the associate level. But if anyone has any questions, they can reach out to me. There's also a ton of info on our webpage that lists all the benefits of joining, so you know kind of what you're getting and the pricing and all of that good stuff, and any of our staff would be more than happy to help.
Is it possible you can give the listening audience kind of like an idea of what a membership would be? I mean, are we talking about $100 a month, $200, or I mean, it seems like you're doing great work, and I know you don't do this work for free. You
well,
have to pay
like
bills.
We do have to pay bills, and we are a small but mighty organization, and the output, a lot of the times people think that we're very well funded and that we have a huge staff. We have a very dedicated staff and board of directors, and they're some of the smartest folks in the industry. So I've got a really amazing support team for this work, but we are very small. So yes, there's the associate level is $1,200 for a year. And then the business level is $5,000, which you're able to engage in our committees. And that's really where a lot of the digestion of bills and regulations comes. We meet with the committees usually every 2 weeks, and it's kind of experts in that area. So we have an ag and manufacturing committee, a quality control, which is primarily labs. We have risk management, which is a lot of, it's kind of HR and insurance and catch-all for some ancillary businesses. And then we have retail delivery and distribution, which is another committee, and then a legislative committee as well. And then a DICE committee, which is diversity, inclusion, and social equity. And all of those committees really help digest bills and regulations that are sort of centered around that area within the industry. And those folks are really hands-on, and they're an incredible resource for us.
And you're located up in Sacramento, right?
I live in San Francisco, but our office is in Sacramento. So I'm between the two. And, we gave up our physical office space right before COVID because we were moving. And then something told me not to sign that 5-year lease agreement. I'm so grateful that we didn't. So we've been working remotely, but now we're getting an office space again next month, because, a lot of what we do is face-to-face lobbying. And that was completely off the table during COVID. So things are opening back up a bit in Sacramento, and we've been having more legislative meetings, and which is great. I love meeting with legislators and lobbying on behalf of the industry. So that's the fun part.
So on that note, Lindsay, if a person is thinking about getting into the cannabis space or starting to get into the cannabis space, is it a good idea for them to contact your organization for some assistance or help or guidance or advice?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes. In general, I would say reach out to as many folks as you can. If you know folks that you think are navigating the space well, see if they would be willing to work with you or talk with you. So for social equity applicants in general, we work closely with COA, which is the Social Equity Owners and Workers Association, which is based out of Los Angeles, but they work with folks all over the state in navigating the trickiness of becoming a legal business. And we actually have a free social equity membership tier. So if you are a member of COA, you can have a free membership with CCIA, which will at least kind of help build the knowledge base on the trickiness of it, on navigating the space. And then so I would say definitely plug in.
Okay, how would people get in touch with you?
My email is my first name, LINDSAY @cacannabisindustry.org.
And as always, if someone contacts you as a result of this program, they should say, I heard about you from the Cannabis Enlightened podcast hosted by Dr. Leroy.
Yes, we wouldn't be here without you. Thank you, Dr. Leroy. Our website is also cacannabisindustry.org, and there's tons of resources on there. And we encourage folks who are thinking about, who are in the industry or thinking about, trying to become a licensed business to check it out. And, we're certainly willing to do everything we can to help folks. As a trade association, we primarily lobby and work on policy reform, which benefits all legal businesses. But, we also try to, try to educate and make sure people understand the challenges and the pitfalls to the best of our ability.
I was just thinking that after listening to you, some folks, now that we're a little bit more mobile in the post-pandemic era, maybe as folks get up to San Francisco or Sacramento, they'd like to maybe come into your office and say, hey, I heard you, on a podcast, and just wanted to, put a face with the voice.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, in years past, prior to the pandemic, we hosted a huge conference every year in Sacramento. 500-600 people would come, and we would have legislators speak and regulators, and then we would have breakout panels in the afternoon with experts in various aspects of the industry. And that was an amazing opportunity for us to meet people face to face, individuals and business owners, and those conferences were really fun. So I'm hoping we can get something going for the fall for another conference.
But it's been fantastic to have this time to talk with you. You're loaded with a whole ton of information, and I'm sure that people are enlightened. Again, I'll use that term, enlightened, with respect to cannabis, the cannabis industry, what's happening in it, and how your organization is trying to make things better for the state and for individuals. So thank you again very much, Lindsay. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed being here and so appreciate the work that you do, Dr. Leroy. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
If you'd like to hear more Cannabis Enlightened with Dr. Leroy, be sure to visit us online at cannabisenlightened.com and subscribe wherever you download your podcasts. Cannabis Enlightened is produced in San Diego, California, and presented by March and Ash at marchandash.com.
Olas Media.